Hi everyone, I'm finally getting to the questions about Lyme disease. What the heck is it? How to treat it? And I think I even made the classic mistake of adding an S at the end. Lyme disease. It's often Lyme disease with co-infections. You often get a whole plethora of little sneaky bugs when you're infected with this. And my experience, again, is it's unique like anyone's will be, but if you take away one thing from this video, it's that Lyme disease and infection is a chance to become your own expert and your own advocate for your health. Doctors and healers and so-called Lyme experts will have their specific protocols and ways of healing, but ultimately it's up to you. If I could go back in time, there were so many moments where something didn't feel right and the healing process became more stressful than the actual infection. And if I could go back in time, I would have listened to that gut instinct to do things simply, do things peacefully when the symptoms from the die-off were worse than the actual infection. I wish I knew to pull back. So, again, be your own expert in this process. Really don't trust anyone, don't trust me, and start to experiment. See what feels right. And I know that can be hard when you have certain infections. The whole intuitive gut instinct is a little bit thrown off, but start tapping into that. It's still there, even with the anxiety and the panic that is a part of Lyme. Yeah, I'll start there. So I've got a few questions saved on my phone from you all, and I'll kind of jump through them in the best way I know how. So, are healing from Bartonella and Lyme different processes? So, Bartonella, again, is another one of the co-infections that commonly comes with Lyme. Lyme is also known as Borrelia. So people will throw around different words, but at a high level, you can follow some overlap, especially when it comes to getting to the root cause of mold and heavy metals and early life stressors that may have made your system ripe for these infections. And some of the herbs do overlap, but there are certain antibiotics and certain antimicrobials that are more targeted, whether it's specifically targeting the Lyme or the Borrelia or specifically targeting the Babesia, the Bartonella, the Chlamydia pneumoniae, this Mycoplasma, whatever fun mix you got, they will be more specific depending on what your practitioner is more familiar with, what feels more calling to you, and also what you respond well to. Because from my experience, again, certain herbs seemed like the safe option, and then starting them, the die-off, the Herxheimer, was again more intense than the actual disease, and that warranted having to scale back. Even though I wanted to just kill and get rid of the infections, if I couldn't maintain enough energetic function to live and be and think and breathe and poop, I needed a different path. So that is part of my journey as well, being really knocked down by some of these approaches that should have been easier on the body that were just a little too much for me. So having to get out of my own way and surrender to what wasn't working so that I could find what did work. Does GI map show Lyme disease? No, it does not. As far as I know, most people these days use either a spinal test or they're using an ELISA Western blot to see what kind of infections you might have. And, I might be behind the times actually. So, again, do your own research. I haven't been tested in the last couple of years, so I don't know what fancy test they're using these days. Oh, and sorry, Lyme titers. That's another test that people will generally use to see, what your viral load is like, and also what's active, what's not active, what you've even been exposed to and maybe not showing an active infection. That can all be helpful in terms of steering the course of treatment. Handle mold or Lyme first. So that's a really good question. And again, as I experienced bouncing from practitioner to expert and different types of healers along the way, everyone had their different idea. Some people think Lyme is the root. Some people think mold is the root. Some people think that the heavy metals are at the root. But from what I found, I think that getting to the metals and the mold before the Lyme can start to allow the system to stabilize and find some strength and find a new homeostasis so that you're strong enough and metabolically robust enough to start getting after the infections. But it's almost this onion-like approach. You peel back a layer and then you might have to jump back to another layer and then jump back to your first layer. But I wouldn't say there's a wrong way to do it. In fact, I'd say the symptoms and the way you're feeling might be a good clue as to what's working and what's not working. Again, you don't want the treatment to feel worse than the actual disease. So say you're doing some mold detoxing and you're in the sauna for 30 minutes a day, but you're starting to feel much worse. You feel completely thrown off and fatigued after being in the sauna. Okay, maybe it's not time to target the mold. Maybe it's time to target the metabolism. Maybe it's time to support the liver function and really boost the mitochondrial activity and see if that can bring a little bit of relief to the system. So I don't mean to leave things kind of loose-endy and messy, but I'd say Lyme and co-infections, it's a messy path. But that's almost the metaphor in it as well. Nothing in life is pin downable, and nothing in life can be put in this beautiful little package as much as we want it to, unless it's a birthday present or something. But part of dealing with and treating and working with Lyme is surrendering to it not looking the way your mind thinks it should, and letting it unfold, following that bouncing ball with a lightness. Because if you fall into the trap, like many of you have maybe mentioned in your messages to me, and myself included, if you fall into that trap of losing all sense of what it even means to be joyful, what it means to be human, because the narrow focus on healing is taking up all of your capacity, that's when it's absolutely time to maybe even scale back all treatments and start to rekindle those processes of even thinking, of following the beauty, of getting lost in creativity, so that you have that deeper wisdom and knowing to really trust the healing process and not get bogged down by what can be really heavy. Of course, my phone keeps losing the questions. So, where does someone start when wanting to heal? Yes, that is the question, right? I think first, it's kind of acknowledging that a lot of what we may have been doing up to this point, high stress, really intense workouts, maybe living in not sustainable ways, maybe even what we were eating as children, what our mothers went through when they were pregnant with us. All of these contribute to where we are at now. So where to start is really honoring that we are this bucket of stressors, and we can't just hurry up and heal with the same mindset that may have gotten us sick, and learning to really slow down and really start to think about what your priorities are. What kind of life do you want to be living? What is important to you? What brings you that sense of wonder and awe? Fortifying that, and then starting really systematically to think, okay, what feels the most intuitive right now? Say your digestion is really off, as mine was. maybe it wouldn't be the best place to really, really start with massive doses of antibiotics. Maybe start with supporting that gut lining, figure out what's going on. And yes, Lyme can really aggravate the gut lining. So I think really supporting the gut before you aggressively attack it would make more sense to me. But what about you? What calls to you when you think about the first step? And there are a lot of catch-22s. I want to honor that. It feels difficult to know what first step to take when, say, you're not even sleeping and you're trying to figure out, okay, in order to sleep, I need to detox this mold. But in order to detox the mold, I first need to move out of this moldy house. But in order to move out of this moldy house, I need to first switch jobs. There are so many layers, and even as I'm saying that, I'm sure you're aware of how stressful it can be to juggle all of this. So the first absolute step, thank you for letting me speak out loud and think out loud, would probably be learning to soften into the chaos, learning to self-regulate, really learning to address the nervous system. And that's why I use tapping and visualization so much. That's why it was so helpful in my own healing journey and what I use with clients now, because we can't expect to heal while we're freaking out. Kate Deering had the wonderful example of it's like trying to dry off when you're still in the shower. We have to learn to be with what's uncomfortable and then slowly start addressing what that smallest first step might be. So once that stress load psychologically is down, I would say start to really clean up your environment. In that sense, I mean, how can you make it as low stress as possible? So maybe getting out of the city, definitely leaving your moldy house, definitely, if available to, scaling back your workload so that you're not constantly in that fight or flight on top of the fight or flight that is triggered by the endotoxin released by these critters. So that's like the first step of the hike. Did you follow any specific protocol? Yes, I followed specific protocols basically based off of what the expert at the time was telling me. So working with Dr. Horowitz, a famous Lyme doctor in New York at the time, very, very specific step by step of what to attack and how to do it. And again, that might work for some people. In fact, I have evidence of people it worked for. For me, deep down, I intuitively felt like it was too many supplements, too many antibiotics, too many protocols all at once. But I decided to push, and there we go with another one of the metaphors. Pushing is not the way to heal. So choosing those gentler options, choosing, if you are someone that's maybe been really intense and really liked the go stress mentality of things, perhaps the healing for you is learning to really slow things down, to learn to do less and see what happens from there. Okay, find any other questions? What's the biggest thing that helped to lower your viral load? So that's a really good question, considering that it was such a long journey. It's really difficult to say, but I think a lot of the principles that I've absorbed from Ray Peat and people that share his information and talk about it, really it's starting to lower endotoxin and lower the leakiness of the gut by removing those difficult to digest, irritating foods. And that brings me to carnivore. While it was not a sustainable long-term solution, by removing all plants, all my supplements, everything that was causing intense reactions in my system, and literally just switching to meat, ghee, and water at first and salt, that allowed, while not ideal, that allowed my system to really start to normalize. And I think even just the burst of cortisol sustained for a while again, not ideal, I feel like that did have a very helpful effect on my system. But again, not for everyone. And would I recommend it to anyone right now, knowing what I know about the metabolism now? Probably not. But that's part of the journey too. It's experimenting. Part of the healing process is trying things and testing and collecting data. It really helps to take notes and see what helped, what did not, because you can start to look back and see what maybe was helpful or what you thought would be helpful and wasn't. And the best part is when you do find things that help, you can start to share it. Roll of sauna, I'm getting one soon. So, I was very, very into the sauna at first because I was super aggressive about getting the mycotoxin burden down and starting to sweat out some of the heavy metals that I had tested for, especially cadmium. But again, everyone's different. For someone that's really metabolically compromised, as I was, the sauna made me feel absolutely miserable. But that intense version of me, that intense part of me, thought that I had to push, I had to keep sweating it out in order to heal. When knowing what I know now, perhaps that was my body's way of saying, hey, actually, this is way more stressful. This is flooding the system with too many toxins right now. Less is more. So with the sauna heat therapy specifically, again, listen to your body, smaller doses perhaps at first, and really you should feel better because there is some evidence showing that heat therapy actually is anti-inflammatory, especially when you keep your blood sugar stable. So if you are going to be using the sauna, have a salty, sweet electrolyte drink beforehand, whether that's some salted orange juice or coconut water with some aloe, maybe even sipping on it during the sauna, really refueling afterwards too, to lower any potential stress cascade. Do you have to take supplements to heal from Lyme? Also a very good question. I would say the majority of my healing came from removing most of the supplements because so many of the things I was taking, first of all, I didn't know what was helping. And second of all, so many of them are filled with additives and preservatives and gut irritants like silica. And it's looking back, I had a suitcase of pills of before breakfast, with breakfast, after breakfast, with lunch, after lunch, with dinner, before bed, if I woke up in the middle of the night. And that alone was so stressful that, again, expecting my body to heal in that state was kind of silly looking and reflecting back. But now with, again, a different understanding of what the body wants and what it needs to thrive, I'd say using food as supplements, whether it's liver, whether it's oysters, pasture-raised egg yolks, really high-quality dairy, like thinking of food in terms of what is the densest possible source of micronutrients I can get with the least amount of irritants. Now I see food as almost this sacred ability to nourish me or this very intense ability to bring me down fast. And I think a lot of the really delicious foods can be really harmful too when the gut is pretty compromised or overgrown. For example, sweet potatoes. I craved those like crazy over the years. But noticing how intense my reactions were, it wasn't until I removed them that I found out that so many of these fermentable fibers, especially in things like sweet potatoes, were exacerbating my symptoms. And simplifying allowed me to figure out what supplements were actually working, whether it was something as simple as, Cascara sagrada to really help the detox and the bile flow and the bowel movements, or something like glycine to really help that calming effect in the body, and even just a high quality magnesium supplement. So really targeted supplements I think would be the way to go, but kind of willy-nilly liver support, hair support, sleep support, blend with a lot of titanium dioxide and magnesium stearate and whatever the heck else they're putting in, I would say avoid those, and definitely avoid fish oil. But don't trust me. What's the best way to get rid of co-infections like Borrelia and Bartonella? So similar to the other question, there are different approaches. And again, there are many doctors and healers that are using a very targeted approach using antibiotics, which I have case studies and know people that really improved following antibiotics. For me, that was not the case. After 6 months of really high dose antibiotics and then years later IV antibiotics with hyperthermia treatments, they knocked me down. So the terrain matters, the person matters, their level of health matters. I think I was personally too compromised and it just decimated me, whereas maybe a small dose for a short time actually would have been more beneficial and maybe helped clear out some of the overgrowths in the gut and would have allowed my body to get a leg up. So other healers have found amazing benefits from using some of the herbals. So things like cat's claw, saw, palmetto, Japanese knotwood, skullcap, let me think, cistus tea, cryptolepis, artemisia, black walnut. Do some searching, but there are some herbs that are very research-based. And again, just honoring the fact that some of these herbs are powerful. You might have really intense Herxheimer reactions. That's when it's time to scale back. Never push to the point of just being so toxic that you're being poisoned by your own die-off. And I was just thinking of one other thing. Herbs. Oh, biofilm busters. I know 2 of you asked about that. So some of the active ingredients from essential oils, whether it be from oregano or garlic, allicin is one of the active ingredients in garlic, cinnamon essential oil, bitter orange, thyme, and clove, those have all shown amazing anti-biofilm abilities, which is really important because these infections are sneaky. It's like they come in with a plan, and they basically can hide from our immune system. They can hide from our attempts to get rid of them. So our best way before we even start treating them is really to start breaking down their defenses and their ability to communicate. So there is some research too showing the antibacterial, anti-malarial, anti-everything effects of methylene blue combined with red light. So that's another avenue I would look into if it so calls to you. Looking up some more questions. Okay, yeah. So insomnia with Lyme disease. Absolutely. And again, this can be triggered by the Lyme. It can be triggered by the heavy metals. It can be triggered by the mold. Really depends on the person. But it's kind of a funny catch-22 because the insomnia makes your system more susceptible to future stressors, which then makes you more susceptible to insomnia. So what really helped me through it, which I know I've talked to a few of you about, is really, I would repeat the phrase, my body will rest when it needs to. Because after being awake for 3 to 4 days, sometimes longer, you enter this kind of weird state of delirium. But finding peace in that, that's the way through. We don't need to add extra suffering to this. And especially in terms of diets too, some Lyme diets are, low carb, sugar-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, etc. A lot of us need a certain amount of carbohydrates to sleep, to continue along that energy production chain, because it takes energy to relax, to sleep. So I would look into making sure you're actually feeling fully nourished. And I'm not a fan of removing any foods unless their specific fibers are triggering you or specific ingredients. But if it's a really whole food, especially animal-based food, and doesn't seem to be causing issues with you, I would say really favor that. And really that state of insomnia is more chronic late stage Lyme. There is this funny idea that it was even told to me that Lyme is hard to get and easy to treat. Maybe if you catch it in the first couple weeks, but if you don't, it's more of this winding path. It becomes like an art form of trying to figure out, okay, how do I support this area? Oh, what's going on with the liver? Okay, what's going on with the gut? Whoa, what about the thyroid? So that ties into insomnia for sure. Thinking about how Lyme and infections can cause a more hypothyroid state. And again, we need a certain amount of thyroid function to have the energy to relax, to sleep throughout the night so that our liver can function smoothly while we're sleeping. So to deal with the insomnia, I would say try and relax into it. Trust that your body will rebalance with enough time. Almost getting excited about it, and I know that might sound weird, but when I wake up in the night sometimes, I will just use that as an excuse to celebrate the fact that I'm alive, to celebrate my aliveness, to notice how even bizarre the world feels in the middle of the night. And that shifts it from a stressful that something is wrong to, okay, just a part of my experience. Peripheral neuropathy, have horrible feet problem at night. So yeah, peripheral neuropathy and just neuropathy in general can be caused by the inflammation triggered by these little pesky guys. And it's often, and again, don't quote me on this, but what I have noticed is that it seems to be where the spirochetes specifically are most concentrated. Like a lot of people will get nerve or joint damage and pain in their knees and their elbows and their shoulders. And oftentimes that's right where the bugs are hiding. So as you find things to slowly boost your metabolic rate so that you can start to clear out their endotoxins, start to clear out the die off, you'll start to notice, I hope, improvement in those systems. So hang in there. And that answers the next question. Can Lyme be concentrated in particular parts of the body? Absolutely. Some people have it really intensely in the brain or in the heart, and symptoms will relate accordingly. Is Lyme disease a metabolic issue or no? That's a really good question. So again, it's people are exposed to Lyme but don't get it. And to me, I see it as part of this stress load. You know, people with adverse childhood experiences or histories of trauma are more likely to get so many diseases and even just large amounts of inflammation in the body that sets up the body for all sorts of other metabolic issues that stem from some stressor at the root. So I would say yes and no. It's hard to say what may have caused it originally, but Lyme disease definitely causes more metabolic issues down the road and could be because you are already metabolically a little bit hindered. How were you aware of progress as you were healing? Also a really good question. It really, that started the quote of the nonlinear art of healing, because it was really up and down. When I thought I was making progress, I'd crash and burn. When I thought I found a doctor or a treatment that I thought would be helpful, go up, and then I'd crash and burn. So it really was learning to not be attached to any outcome and relearning to listen to my gut, because there were so many things I wish I did not try. And I had that little voice saying, please don't do this, but I did it anyway. So just a few more questions. So choosing RX or herbs, again, entirely personal. Trust yourself. I think some of the herbs are actually even stronger than the antibiotics. So it really depends. And it depends what stage of Lyme you're at. Again, it can be broken into about 3 stages, but depending on how chronic your symptoms are, what you've tried before, what your reactions are to antibiotics or herbs, that will give yourself a cue as to what steps to take. Low carb. So again, I would not ever do a low carb diet again, knowing that it can be so stressful for the body and even just the emotional turmoil that comes with being low carb, we want to lower stress so that the body feels safe enough to heal. And just things like fructose, really even nutrient dense sources of things like honey and maple and fresh fruit. Not only are the minerals very anti-stress, but the preferred fuel source for the cell is fructose and glucose, and we want to make sure we have abundant supplies of that so that the body feels nourished enough to then have the energy to tackle these critters. Fat stores toxins. So that's a really great question. I have noticed that people with actually a little bit extra cushion seem to do better. And yes, there might be some heavy metals or some mycotoxins stored up in the fat, but much better than someone who's, say, really emaciated, and those toxins will go right to the next best place, which is likely the brain. And I would say that from my experience, again, doing heavy metal chelations, I was at such a low weight and I felt crazy. I remember just feeling shaky, panicked, literally unable to function because my insides were so just all over the place. So I think if I had some extra fat at the time, my brain would have been spared and I probably would have been a little bit calmer. And even just from thinking about how the brain works, we need a certain amount of fat to stabilize and to feel calm. So I would say you're actually in a better position if you have a little bit of extra fat. And as you slowly detox and slowly replace your fat stores with saturated fats, it will make the whole detox process easier. Sugar versus fat. Again, that goes back to the other question, but really I think there's a lot of debate about this. I'm sure you're well aware, but from my current level of understanding and from how my body is functioning now, it really feels like forcing the body to burn fat can have some immediate anti-inflammatory effects, but long-term seems to really be associated with states of disease. Things like cancer and diabetes, that's when the cell is burning fat as a fuel. But is that ideal in terms of not only efficiency or how we feel? I don't think so. We really want to maximize our carbon dioxide retention. We want to maximize our ATP production on the most efficient path. And sugar seems to be the way to do that, or carbohydrates. Okay. Water retention and inflammation. So just the estrogen and the inflammation and the serotonin produced from an inflamed system can cause this. So I would say, again, be patient with yourself. Do the things that help you to feel good and lower inflammation. And never underestimate the power of things that are free, whether it's walking barefoot, getting adequate sun exposure, getting out in nature and letting that regulate your nervous system. Cuddling up with a dog and really letting yourself slow down and soften. Drinking water that isn't contaminated with heavy metals and fluoride and birth control that might be worsening your symptoms. So really, I'd say, going back to that original question of where to start with building yourself the most beautiful foundation of not only simplicity, but avoiding the things that are known triggers. We have a lot of environmental toxins floating around these days. The world is stressful, so doing your best to really simplify and think of your body as something that you get to take care of, and being intentional without being psychotic about what you put in it, I think would be the way to go. All right, I think I'll double check if there are any other questions, but anxiety, yep. So again, dealing with it versus what causes it. Lyme and co-infections are tricky. It's basically your nervous system picking up on the fact that there is something releasing toxins. So of course it's wisely saying, doesn't really know what's going on, but the picture that the nervous system and the brain paints is, okay, danger, danger, danger. And even just their activity along the vagus nerve can cause anxiety that can wake us up. Or releasing large amounts of serotonin can be very anxiety inducing, contrary to popular belief. It can even be very depressing when we have large amounts of serotonin being produced in the gut from these critters. So, again, patience, slowly scaling back and starting to notice even the language you're using. I think I'll end with this, but really noticing how you're speaking to your body. If it's, I'm sick, I'll never be able to do what I want to do. I'm tired of feeling so sick. I can't do this. The body can fall into what's called a limbic system loop. Part of healing, I'd say maybe the most profound part of healing and what has made the biggest difference for me is literally putting the brain in a place where at first it might have to pretend to be healthy, but starting to think like that healthy version of you, to remind your physiology that it can shift, it can adapt. We can't expect ourselves to heal if we're stuck in that catch-22 of danger, dying, sickness, despair. But we can heal when we keep choosing to follow that light, to keep choosing to follow hope and connection and joy, even when we have symptoms. I'm not saying it's easy, but we can learn to hold both. So, yeah, I think, it always comes back to brain rewiring for me, because at a certain point it becomes so exhausting trying to heal, trying to figure out what the next step should be, what worked for them, why didn't it work for me? Versus, okay, how can I step into that empowered version of me? How can I start to think differently? How can I train my brain to not even react when I'm wide awake for the third night in a row, to not even react when I'm having flu-like reactions because of something I ate or because of what the critters are releasing, to not even react when another test comes back showing even higher levels of a certain, who knows what kind of critter or infection or parasite that is likely comorbid with Lyme. So I'll send you off today with just a reminder that the body is always trying to organize. The body's always trying to heal. The body wants to heal. And when we get out of the way, when we start to even see our life more beautifully because of our illness, it's like the body catches right up to that. Not to ignore the fact that, yes, treatments are likely needed, but the way in which you go about healing is the way you live your life. Your life is right now. Treating chronic Lyme and infections and parasites and all the things that comes up with that, whether it's heavy metals, whether it's candida, whether it's, all of the mental imbalances that come with it. Taking time to live now the best you can will be so fruitful. So I'll close with that for today. Thanks for listening. Feel free to reach out with any more specific questions. Part of my mission is to pay it forward with what I wish I did differently, what I wish I knew then. So don't be a stranger.
Some scrub, Jay. We've got some planks, some learning, got some videos, some slippers.